this video, we're going to show you how to remove and replace front brakes on a Chevy Trax. To remove the wheel, you need a 19mm socket, and we're going to go in a star form pattern. I like to leave the car in neutral so that I can turn the wheel so I have easy access. That way I can remove the caliper and get to all the bracket and bolts. Take off the boot dust cover on that bleeder screw, and I'm going to break the bleeder screw free so that I can push that piston back with ease once I take the caliper off. Just like break it free and then tap it so that you can loosen it up. We're going to take the two mounting bolts for the caliper to the bracket. Those are 10mm socket. Set those aside. And now we can just take our caliper and slide it off. Now I have a catch bucket underneath, as you can hear. Examine the boot, make sure there's no fluid coming out. Everything looks good. So I'm going to take my piston spreader and I'm going to put the tool in there. And I'm going to push the piston back. But I like to open the bleeder screw and push the fluid out so it doesn't go in reverse back through the master cylinder and any ABS modules possibly. So that's why I broke that free first. And I have a catch pan underneath. That is a 10mm socket on this caliper bleeder screw. And now aiming at the bucket, I'm just going to push that piston back, paying attention to how smoothly it goes back. Make sure it doesn't drag. And look at that dirty fluid. It's another way of knowing that this fluid is well heated up and needs to be changed. If you have fluid like this color and not clear, you're going to want to do a brake flush. Now I'm going to get my 10mm wrench and I'm going to snug up on that bleeder screw. I'm going to grab a caliper hook. You can use a bungee cord, and I'm just going to hang this right up out of the way. I'll use the strut. Take my tool out. Let that just hang right out of there. So this is the caliper bracket, and it is mounted with two bolts onto the knuckle. We have one up here and one down there. This particular bracket bolt is an 18mm socket or wrench. We're going to break it free. Let's break the other one free. That's your caliper and brake pads attached. Now we're going to take it apart and clean it. All right, so now I'm going to take the pads out of the bracket, but I like to pay attention to, this is how it mounts. So this is the inner pad and that's the outer pad. Let's see if the inner pad or the outer pad has that pad wear guard clip. So we know the inner pad and the clip goes on the top. So they're kind of frozen in there, so I just take a tap on a hammer, tap them right out. Take these tins off because we get new ones that come with the brake pads. Do the same to both sides. And then we're going to clean up the sliders and clean this bracket up. I'm going to take the top pin out first. And how I'm going to do that is I'm just going to twist and pinch down here where this rubber boot is attached, peel it back, pop it off. And the top pin usually will always have like a rubber boot on it, just like that. You want to examine that, make sure it's not torn or swollen. If it gets swollen, can't have that. Then we're going to take it completely off the bolt, the boot. Examine the boot and the bolt. Bolt is clean, it's not rusted. And the boot, we want to make sure it doesn't have any tears in it, because if water gets in there, it will seize that pin up, and then it will not work anymore. And we're going to look inside there. Sometimes I like to just take a little wire brush, a circular one, and go in there and clean that up. You can take some brake clean, clean it up. All right, so I just took a pocket screwdriver just to check the amount of grease in there. Really not much. So I'm going to reapply, obviously. Always do this. Some clean new silicone paste. Just going to put a little bit right there like that. And I could take the screwdriver and distribute it out within that. The pin's going to get new grease on it anyways. So before we do that though, I am going to put some silicone paste or caliper grease, whichever one you use. And I'm going to put it inside the boot. I like to get it inside those grooves, so every time that bolt goes by it, it lubricates that boot up. This one happens to have a groove line on one side. It has a little like dimple on this side. Make sure that dimple goes on the actual bracket so it seats in there nice. Won't let go. And we're going to take the pin and I'm going to put some new silicone paste on there. Get rid of that dirty stuff. Don't have to overload it because it won't slide in. It's kind of a tight fit in there. So I like to spin as I'm pushing it in to get the air out. And then you'll just push that and make sure that it seats itself right on that slider. Push it down, all the way down, and let any air out if you have to. Do the same to the other side. And now that the pins are all cleaned and new silicone's added, we're going to clean up the bracket. I get a wire wheel or a brush like this, and you want to clean all that rust away. You don't want any lumps of rust back because it will cause that metal tins to expand and squeeze the pads and stop them from sliding back and forth and retracting like they should for a proper brake job. Do both sides. Clean up the bracket with the brake clean, make sure there's no dust. And now, let it dry, make sure it's air dried. And I apply a coat of brake caliper grease or the silicone paste under the tins, not on top of the tins. Both sides. This stops water from building up underneath the tins, which water and metal cause rust. So that can damage this bracket and the tins, compromise the operation of the pads. I do not put grease, caliper grease or silicone paste up here. Metal and metal will slide perfectly fine as long as it's not interrupted with dirt or grease that collects the dirt. Snap those down just like that. Make sure there's no excess silicone because it'll just collect the dirt. Now you can install your pads here or you can install them once it's attached to the car. This is the inner pad because it has that indicator clip, the wear clip, right on that. We discussed that earlier. So a quick way to install pads sometimes, if it's easy enough, is I tilt it kind of sideways like this, and then I stand it up. This is a good way to test and see if it will slide. If it does not slide in place easily, then it will not retract. Now we can remove our rotor, and this particular model has a hold-on screw. It's a little Torx bit, which is a T30 socket, and we're going to just remove that. And then just take the rotor off. So this hub isn't in really bad shape. Sometimes I'll take an air grinder to it to get the rust off, but it's in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to use my wire brush and some brake clean. I'm going to brake clean it first to soften up the rust, as you can see, and then I'll take my wire brush to it. And this is where the rotor will seat on this hub, and you don't want it to be seated at a different angle or at an angle at all that will cause the rotor to warp, or you'll get a pulsation on the brake pedal. Make sure there's no big rust lip on the outside there. Once that dries, I'm going to apply some copper anti-seize. Basically, I'm just trying to get the hub covered so that the rotor will not stick to it. Just going to put the rotor like that so I can put some brake clean and get the oil off of it from the storage. That's what they do. They put a little light coat of oil so it doesn't rust up while it's in storage, plus my dirty hands. Then I'll turn it around. And now I need to make sure I line up the actual mounting screw. That little Torx bit head. Put it on tight to the hub. Start this by hand. T30 socket. And then take some brake clean to it. Now I'm going to turn the wheel again so I can see that caliper bracket easily. So the mounting bolts, remember I told you to clean them up with a wire wheel or brush to get the old thread lock out there. I applied a new coat and I took them to a wire wheel. So now we can slide our bracket on. Line up the threads, start it by hand. Do the same to the bottom bolt. Once I know they started, I'm going to close those pads in a little bit. And that was the 18mm socket. I'm just going to snug them up and then I'll torque them to spec. All right, so the caliper bracket to knuckle mounting bolts is 118 foot-pounds. That's the torque. So with the torque wrench, we're just going to torque it down. Remount the caliper itself. Make sure that hose doesn't get twisted and turned around. Sometimes it's pretty common for people to twist it and then apply the caliper. I don't know how they do it, but they do. Make sure it is not twisted. It's in the position that it should be. Nice bend there and a bend there. Get the two mounting screws, line them up with the pins and start it by hand. I'm going to bottom these out by hand because the torque to them is 21 foot-pounds. So it's not a lot. If you put an electric or an air gun to it, it's going to over-tighten them. Now that everything is mounted and ready to go, I lowered the car and I manually pumped the brakes without starting the car. I just wanted to get the fluid back into this caliper. And now I'm just going to gravity bleed it. There should really be no air to it, but we're just going to open it and let it drip out. Until I know that there's no air. Then I'm going to snug it up. And I'm just going to clean it. Make sure there's no residual brake clean on there. And make sure you reapply the dust boot. Now we can mount the tire. Always stop the lug nuts by hand. Then we'll get our 19mm socket and we'll just snug them up in a styrofoam pattern and then we'll torque it to factory specs. Wheel torque is 100 foot-pounds, 19mm socket. Always doing a styrofoam pattern. Double check. And don't forget to check your brake fluid level and top it off if you need any. You can always undo the cover and read and you'll see what type of fluid it takes. And it will say .3 or 4. And this one says 3. And you're going to want to fill it until it gets to the top line. When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.